Und jetzt darf ich überleiten zu unserer Opening Keynote. Denn wie blickt einer der bekanntesten und versiertesten Experten für neue Arbeit in die Zukunft? Er sagt als Arbeitsforscher, was wir erleben, ist eher ein Mentalitätswechsel als eine technologische Revolution. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass er bei uns ist. Bestsellerautor und Lehrstuhlinhaber for the Future of Work. Hier ist bei uns Bolles.
All right, thank you, Katie. Because you and I are fascinated by the future of work, we climb into a time machine and we set the dial for the year 2050. And we meet a young worker at the time by the name of Kai. And Kai does work that's kind of like what we used to call HR or people department work. Kai is a talent magnet, but Kai doesn't work for any one particular company. Kai actually has what I call a portfolio of work, a range of different projects that Kai does. So Kai wakes up in the morning and puts on a pair of augmented reality glasses. And Kai's artificial intelligence coach comes online and tells Kai what the schedule for the day is. Now, Kai has a favorite coffee shop that Kai likes to go to, but you know Berlin traffic. So Kai calls a self-driving flying car and goes out to the outskirts of town and begins to work online. And there's no penalty because Kai has access to a global network of satellites that has over a gigabit of access. And so Kai begins to do work for the day. Now, Kai is looking for a particular kind of talent, a talent at the intersection of space, robotics, and artificial intelligence coding. So Kai actually decides to go looking where you might find that kind of talent. And it turns out that there is a digital world that is a twin of our own world, where many such people, talented people, like to spend a lot of time in the day. And Kai finds a 14-year-old talent that has an IQ greater than Einstein's, who is fascinated by this intersection of different technologies. So Kai arranges to meet in person, and it turns out that this 14-year-old talent actually has hearing challenges. And so it just so happens Kai has a pair of gloves that allow Kai to sign, and it translates it automatically into text so that somebody can understand it. Now, the two of them talk, and they realize there's actually a tremendous opportunity, not just for this young talent to go to work for the project that Kai has, but actually there's a new idea for technology that nobody has come up with yet. So they agree on the spot to create a digital organization, a decentralized autonomous organization, or DAO, using software that locks in all the agreements for the kind of organization it could become, creates its own digital currency, and the two of them launch it on the spot. And then at the end of the day, Kai goes home, another self-driving flying car, and puts on a skull cap that actually can read the human mind and captures everything that Kai learned that day. Now, then we look down at the dial on our time machine, and we realize we didn't go anywhere. We stayed in this time, because every single technology that I mentioned either exists today or is in development. Ray-Ban has a technology called Ray-Ban Stories, which is augmented glasses that you can buy today that can annotate the world around you. The artificial intelligence coach, you've probably read that there is a piece of software that Google has created where one engineer thinks maybe it's already sentient. Self-driving flying cars, there are 37 different companies around the world that are working on this. This is actually an image from a new airport being built outside of Miami in the United States just for flying cars. And Lilium, a startup in Germany, actually has a prototype For one, you know that Elon Musk's SpaceX Starlink already has 100 megabit per second service, so a gigabit per second should be no problem. There actually is a startup by the name of Astroforge that was started in January of this year to go mine asteroids and has already booked time on SpaceX's flights. Mr. Musk also believes that his new robot out of his company Tesla, the Tesla bot, is going to be more popular than the Tesla car. It turns out that programming in the future may not be as much of a challenge. You've probably heard already that there are coding tools like OpenAI that can generate code just by describing the behavior that you want to see from them. That twin of the world that we live in, Niantic, the Google subsidiary, is sending around workers, including my nephew in Brooklyn, to scan all sorts of buildings and other parts of our physical world and to build a digital twin of that world. I mentioned a 14-year-old with an IQ greater than Einstein's. This is Adhara Perez. She was born in Mexico at the age of 8. She was diagnosed with being on the spectrum and ADHD, and then she was tested, and it turns out that it does indeed have an IQ greater than Einstein's. At the age of 14, she's developing 3 different degrees in college. It turns out 2 students at the University of Washington created gloves that can do exactly what I said. They can do sign language and translate into text in real time. Decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, are a thing. There's a gentleman by the name of Changpeng Zhao, who in China used to be a McDonald's fry cook, and he started a company called Binance, and at least before the crypto meltdown, it was worth $96 billion. And then finally, the skullcap to read the human mind. There's an amazing innovator by the name of Mary Lou Jepsen, works in a Quonset hut in Sausalito, north of San Francisco, ex-Google executive. And she has created technology that can scan the heart using infrared to be able to determine if you've had a heart attack. And she believes that it's so high resolution, she'll eventually be able to create a skullcap that can actually see the activity of synapses in the human mind. So breathtaking view of the future of work, but really the present of work. As a matter of fact, the science fiction author Bruce Sterling has got a wonderful line, which is, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. You may not have ridden in a self-driving car before. I live in the Fillmore district in San Francisco, and Steiner Street right near me is a test bed for Google's subsidiary Waymo, and I see them about 20 times a day. And so this is how exponential change happens. As a matter of fact, this is what Singularity University, now known as Singularity Group, was founded on. Our founders, Ray Kurzweil in his book Singularity is Near, and Peter Diamandis in his book Abundance, what they tried to point out is that we have exponential change happening to us all the time. If I had told you 15 years ago that there was going to be this piece of technology that you would leave your home without your keys or your wallet, but I call this your digital distraction device. You would not leave home without this. You would have said I was crazy. And I said, oh, by the way, you're going to press a button on it, and a stranger's car is going to come up. I actually did this yesterday. You're going to open the door, and you're going to say, Ahmed, and he's going to say, Gary, and you're going to get in a stranger's car. Didn't your mother tell you never to get in a stranger's car? You're going to get in a stranger's car. 15 years ago, you would have told me I was crazy. But this is how exponential change happens over and over again. It's almost under the radar screen. We don't see anybody getting into an Uber, and then suddenly everybody is. And so the truth is, though, it's not just about technology. Our world changes exponentially, not just because of technology. That's just the tool set. Think of technology as the kinds of tools that we use to try to solve problems and achieve our goals. But there also is what I call a next skill set, a tremendous range of different ways that we as humans solve problems, the way that we channel our energies to create value. And then finally, there is a mindset. There's a way that each of us approaches the problems, the situations, the other people with whom we collaborate. And so I call these the 3 legs of the stool for exponential change: mindset, skill set, and tool set. And as we talk about these unique times in which we all live, I'm going to keep coming back to this again and again to talk about how you, in your own life, in your organization, in your industry, how you can help to catalyze that next mindset, skill set, and tool set. So exponential change happens, and we can point to technologies that can do it, but it's not just because of those technologies. And if I told you this 3 years ago, you would have said, sure, what else? And of course, the answer was a virus. Many people, their lived experience of that exponential curve, things doubling again and again and again, really didn't hit home until we saw the infection rates of the virus. And then in our reaction to it, we created completely new rules about how we would work and how we would learn. Well, I called this the Great Reset. As a matter of fact, in March of 2020, my organization, Charette, a small but mighty consulting company based in San Francisco, we looked back at previous resets like the Great Recession, and it turns out that they all seem to have sort of three phases. There's a falling off the cliff phase. Remember, how many people remember March 2020? Wasn't that a long time ago? Complete uncertainty. Maybe this virus thing, it'll be a week or two, then we're back in the office, right? And then there was predictably, remember I said this in March of 2020, a middle phase, kind of like a heartbeat or a fever chart where we suddenly can turn the lights back on again. Oh, let's all go back to the office. Oh, nope, Omicron is here, back home. And so it was predictable that it was going to be this constantly changing, almost a Venn diagram of your lived experience, your country, the infection rates, your company's policies, your kind of work, your team, and so on, that would determine whether or not we're all here together in person or whether we're all distributed again. And then there was a predictable third phase, which in the United States, we don't like to just say building back, but hopefully building back better, that we would take the insights we had from the earlier phases and we would all figure out, now how do we go forward? How do we keep what we want to from what we've just learned? And how do we apply it to the future that we all want to build together? Well, you know, if you've been to Disneyland, there's these little markers saying, you know, where you are on the map. You are here. We are here. For many of you, this might be one of the first in-person events that you've been to since the pandemic began. And so we're at this inflection point. It's a picture I want you to have in your head of we've gone through these other phases and now we are emerging. And each of us, we all need to choose how we will emerge. And I believe what's ended up happening is it isn't just a pause. We didn't just learn a few things and then go bungee cord back to the way that we used to work. I think work has changed irrevocably, or it should change irrevocably. Because those old rules of work we were all following, there are many, many limitations that kept us from being able to be nimble and adaptive and innovative. Well, what were those old rules of work? Well, there's this really smart guy named Aristotle 2,000 years ago. When he would approach big, thorny, challenging problems, he would ask in English, what are the 6 W's? And so let's look at what the old rules of work were and then how they've changed in the pandemic. The what of work, it was basically tasks. Look at the average job description that each of us have. It's basically a set of tasks, steps that you went through. The where of work, well, if it was a traditional workplace, it was a cubicle. Kind of looks a lot like a factory production line. The when, the arc of our careers, my father actually figured this out in a book called The 3 Boxes of Life. A big chunk of learning, then a big chunk of work, and then a little chunk of leisure in what I call the period formerly known as retirement. That was sort of the arc of many of our lives, the when of our work. Who we worked with, well, it was the people in the cubicle next door, right? If you could see them, you could trust them, right? The how we helped to guide the work of others, well, maybe we didn't trust them. Maybe we only trusted them if we could see them. I called it management by surveillance. And then suddenly a pandemic comes along and we were forced to trust each other. And then finally, the why of work, well, it's probably to get paid, get that paycheck. And so these were the old rules, and there's nothing wrong with the old rules of work. There's many people have had tremendously productive lives following them. The challenge is that in a world of exponential change, if we are locked into the old rules of work, our ability to be able to continually adapt may be limited and affected. So here's another picture to have in your mind. We always have had old rules, sort of many of them inherited from the industrial era, 9-to-5 jobs, 5 days a week in the same workplace. Yeah, those were probably a lot like a production line. And then we knew that there were new rules. We knew tech companies were experimenting with things like work from home policies, like IBM and Yahoo, and then they shot those policies. Why? Because they didn't trust the workers to be working from home, which probably meant that you were just taking your kid to the football game. And so along comes a virus, and then suddenly we all had to create the next rules together. We had to co-create them. We had to figure all this out in that Great Reset. So again, just like Disneyland, you are here. We're at the point where we could fall back into the old rules. It's really, really easy. That's what humans do. We resist change. The enemies of the future only have one strategy. It's just to delay. It's just fall back into old patterns. Or we can co-create those next rules together today, starting today, here at Future Work. So let's talk about what those next rules need to be then. Well, the what of work used to be just tasks, but really when you think about work, most of it is about solving problems. So my father wrote a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which became the world's enduring career manual. I was trained in his methods when I was 19. And he figured out that if you present yourself as a problem solver to a potential employer, I get your problems, I understand your customers' problems, I have solved those kinds of problems before, you are far more likely to get the job than the next person. How do we solve problems? We have human skills. That's kind of it, human skills applied to problems. So the what of work needs to shift from that very task-oriented model to much more about project-centric work, problem-centric work, and using our human skills. The where of work, I think we figured this out. You change contexts all the time. There are times where you need to be with other human beings in the same room. There are times where you need to be alone just thinking. There are times where you need to be walking in the park and collaborating together. Think of that as context switching, a flexible fabric of the different things you do throughout a given week, and the flexibility to be able to continually determine those. I talked about the old rules of work being this sort of career arc of education, then work, then leisure. Well, young people nowadays know that's kind of not the way it works. They come out of high school, college, vocational school, and they might get a day job, but then they're driving for Uber at night, and they're working on a startup with their friends, and they take a gap month. And the parents ask me all the time, why won't my kid get a real job? This is the answer. This is a hedge against an exponential future, constant change. The who of work, it's no longer just the people in the cubicle next to you. It's not a workforce and it's not a network. I call it a work net. We have broken the seal on whom you can collaborate with. You can use technology, that tool set that I talked about, to connect to half the people on the planet that have one of these digital distraction machines. So we have created this frictionless environment where we have the potential to collaborate and learn from virtually anyone. The how of work, the way that we used to do management by surveillance, we need a completely new mindset where we need to shift from being what my friend Esther Wojcicki in her book Moonshots in Education calls the sage on the stage, the one with all the answers, to the guide on the side, the one with the best questions. We need to stop thinking of this thing like of leadership like it's a thing, it's a characteristic that only some people have. Anybody can lead. Anybody can guide the work of others. And then finally, we need to consider the meaning of work, the why of work. And I want to dive into this for just a minute because this is where I get a tremendous amount of questions from audiences all over the world. So think of that first job that you had, that first cruddy, challenging job. I'm known around the world as either Professor Gary or Uncle G. And I advise young people all the time, and I'll get a phone call, Uncle G, I got a job. Oh, that's awesome. What are they paying you? I don't know. Well, maybe you'll find out in your first paycheck. The whole idea was that first job just to get paid, and then you found out after a while, if you got really good at it, you'd get paid better. Oh, okay. So these are the old rules of work. Feed your family, put a roof over their heads, everything's great. The problem is, in a world of exponential change, it may not be enough. And then my father in this book 50 years ago, What Color is Your Parachute? He discovered if you also give people permission to do what they love, to have a North Star or a Southern Cross in their work, they actually have the potential to be able to be guided, to be drawn like a magnet to the kind of work that they think they can do and have the best enjoyment out of it. Use the skills they love to use, work with the people they love to work with, solve the problems they most are interested in, and so on. And then maybe, eventually people would discover, oh, there's also this thing about what the world needs. Maybe when you retired, you volunteered in the local food bank. Well, the old rules of work this was kind of like a ladder, or in Silicon Valley, we call it a stack. You sort of worked your way up, and maybe you never got to what you loved, or you never got to what the world needs. But some of you may know that this model actually is called Ikigai. It's practiced in Japan, and especially on Okinawa, where in Dan Buettner's Blue Zones, he says they are some of the most long-lived people on the planet. And they believe that a life is not well lived unless you have all four of these elements. So for the old rules of work, it was kind of like a stack, but young people are flipping the stack. They come out of college, high school, vocational school, and they ask, what does the world need? They've got these digital distraction devices. They can doom scroll all day. They know the thoughts of the leader of a country halfway around the world who is under attack 5 minutes after he thinks them. They know the problems of the world. And so they ask, what does the world need? If I can do that, I'll love it. If I love it, I'm going to get good at it. And if I get good at it, I'm going to get paid for it. This is another answer to the parent's question, why won't my kid get a real job? This is a totally different era. And emerging as we are from a global pandemic, which is going to have all these ripple effects on our mental health, on our institutions, we need to help empower those young people to be able to do all four of these things. But if you work in an organization of any size, you know that it's a multi-generational challenge. You've got people that are going up the stack and people that are coming down the stack, and you've got to help them to be able to collaborate and to learn from each other. So this is kind of how work is changing. Where should you focus? We're here at Future Work 22. Let's not waste a perfectly good pandemic. Let's use this as an inflection point to figure out where we need to focus, each of us going forward. So I often say there are 4 domains for the future of work: individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. For you as an individual, how can you find or create or modify the work that you do today so it will continually be meaningful and well paid? For your organization, I know many of you are focused on how you can help your organizations to develop and find the talented people it needs. We've got this big mismatch going on in many countries. In the United States, we have 11.2 million job openings, more than in any time in history. And it's because there's workers over here and there's work over here, and they're not matching up the way that they need to match up. If you are rooted in your community, if you care what's going on in your community, you want that to be an ecosystem where everybody can thrive. And then finally, when I sit down with ministers of labor and ministers of education in countries from Brazil to Tunisia, they want to know, how can we build an economy that is more nimble and inclusive and adaptive? So you get to pick. You get to pick the domain. You get to determine, are you just going to be a model? Are you going to focus on what you need to do for your work? Or are you going to help others to do that? And are you going to do that in the context of an organization, a community, or a country? Okay, but how? Like, all right, I've given you the challenge. How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to go back to the 3 superpowers that I talked about earlier: mindset, skill set, and tool set. And I'll tell you why these are each critical and different. So mindset, I said, was the way that you prepare yourself for encountering problems, situations, working with other people. Basically, we think of 4 different sort of base mindsets. When we looked at successful organizations, we found that they tended to have sort of 1 or more of 4 things that they focused on. Every single individual in the organization is focused on growth and learning and changing. Everybody is focused on being effective and high performance. Everybody's focused on being more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable. And or everybody's focused in on alignment. The more distributed your organization becomes, the easier the flywheel effect of no longer being connected. Now, if you're going to pick any one place to start with, as the author Carol Dweck says in her book Mindset, start with growth. Start with a growth mindset. And as a matter of fact, later on today at the Forever Day 1 session, you can hear about how organizations are developing a growth mindset. But no matter where you start, each of these are critical aspects of the human mindset as we try to create organizations that can be more adaptive and nimble. Now, what about skill set? You have dozens and dozens of skills, but it turns out that each of us as individuals were kind of like icebergs. We only see, there's a peculiar part of the way that our minds work, we only see certain skills. We think everybody can do the things that we're good at. And it's true for each of us as we hire people, as individuals in our organizations. We hire for them this narrow set of skills that's in the job description. But there's all this human potential under the waterline. Remember the first Zoom call you had with some of your coworkers? You're looking into their homes, into their lives. You have a guitar on the wall. I play guitar. You have kids. I didn't know you have kids. You have a sick aunt at home. Suddenly the aperture opened up, and all of these different characteristics of your coworkers were suddenly unfolding like a blossom to you. And this is a commitment we need to continue to make. We can't suddenly blind ourselves and go back to the time where we don't need to know about each other as full human beings. We need to actually help everybody in the organization to be that full human being and actually to be able to leverage their own human potential. Now, I said you had dozens and dozens of skills, but here we are, 21st century, and we need to learn 21st century skills. We live in a world of exponential change. I maintain there are 4 skills for today and tomorrow. And these are what I call flex skills. They're not bodies of knowledge that we learn traditionally in school. They're flex skills, skills usable in a range of different situations. And in English, it just so happens that they spell PACE. So we need to be problem solvers. I think I've beaten that one enough. That's why people hire us. That's why we hire other people, is to solve problems. Now I know in some organizations there's 1 or 2 people who think it's their job to create problems, and you know exactly who those are. But basically we're here to solve problems, and it doesn't matter if it's a dirty floor or a complex market entry strategy. It's a problem to be solved. Once we're solving problems, though, we need to be trial and error machines. We need to be continually adaptive. Remember back in March of 2020 when you're just trying to figure this thing out. Okay, where do I click on mute on Zoom? Okay, some of us are still figuring that out. But basically, we had to learn this new tool set. We need to be continually adaptive. We have to be creative because this is what keeps us ahead of the robots and software. It's going to take them a long time to catch up to human creativity. And then finally, empathy. That kind of sounds a little different from the others. Well, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, one of my favorite quotes of his is, "I would say all innovation is the most humane quality that we have, which is empathy." And what does a startup founder do? They fall in love with a customer's problem. They continually adapt and iterate it in creative ways until they come up with what's known as an MVP, a minimum viable product. And so this is what each of us need to do to be intrapreneurs inside our organization, entrepreneurs in solving problems in our communities, in our countries. We need to have this PACE skill set to be able to solve problems of today and tomorrow. And then finally, tool set. Well, I'm from Silicon Valley. We normally start with tool set. We think if we just throw the right technology at the problem, everything's fine. Well, I leave it to the end because we need a tool belt of different technologies, and I mentioned some of those at the beginning, the ones that augment us as human beings. You know, within your organization, especially if you have a large enterprise, there's lots of other technologies, enterprise skills databases, enterprise skills marketplaces, ways to be able to help humans to be able to continually and dynamically bind around problems. We will always be changing that landscape of technologies, but it's important also to know that there are techniques, there are processes we as humans go through as we solve problems. There are creative problem-solving techniques like design thinking, rapid typing, moonshot thinking, which is 10xing the solution that you thought you just came up with, and now suddenly an annoying voice in the room says, how could we make this 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, 10 times better, reach 10 times more people? And then there are also our techniques of effectiveness. If you've got programmers who are using agile methodologies, you've heard probably about objectives and key results if you're not using them, OKRs, and then SMART goals, whatever techniques you choose for effectiveness inside your organization. You need to have a set of tools that you can continually pull off of the shelf to be able to solve problems for today and tomorrow. So I said that you can choose your domain. I know that many of you are focused on organizations. I want to give you a charge. I want to point you in a direction. And as this inflection point, this unique inflection point in time, we have the same opportunity if we have anything to do with the people of the organization, whether you simply manage or lead a team, or whether or not you have responsibility for how people manage and lead throughout the organization. We used to call that function personnel, and then we called it HR or people, and at the beginning with our Kai, I said, no, it's humans. Ultimately, it's all about humans. It's helping humans to be able to understand their own superpowers, to have the mindset, skill set, and tool set that they need. This is our opportunity, not to bungee cord back to the way we used to help that people function, but instead to think of how we can continually make it a more adaptive and flexible process for more human-centric work. We need to co-create what those next rules are for humans. Now, at this point, I've thrown a lot of ideas. I've told you we're at this inflection point of exponential change. I told you we have to jettison many of the old rules of work and leverage the next rules of work. And now you're here at this event. You're going to go to a range of sessions. If you're listening online, you're going to go back to your work. What should you do next? It's easy to keep on thinking about that future, but then fall back into the patterns of today. So how should you think about what you can do next? Well, imagine this. Imagine if you could talk to future you, a future you of 5, 10, 15 years in the future. And you had a conversation with that future you. And future you says, what is the one thing you could have done today that future you would say, absolutely, you focused on what you needed to do the most. Imagine you can see yourself from the future and you can have that conversation. Dan Kahneman wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he said, we tend to kind of already have answered a lot of things on our own. So I want you to answer this question for yourself. What's the one thing after this event that you need to focus on when you think about this process of co-creating the next rules of work? And then the other question to ask yourself is, if you're successful, how will you know? How will future you judge your efforts of today? And I hope future you will be just as benevolent towards you as you are to past you. That you realize that at every point in your life, you're always doing the best you can, making the best decisions you can, but to justify to future you why you made the decisions and how you would judge your efforts. And then, here's what I'm going to urge you to do is tell one person. We know from 50 years of career counseling that if you help somebody to externalize, to tell somebody what their commitment is, I don't care if it's the person sitting next to you here in the room, or one of your coworkers, or one of your friends, but somebody that you tell them what your commitment is, the thing you want to change the most. Tell that person your commitment, and in a month, tell them to ask you, how have you done so far? How have you done as you go along? All right, so I've given you a charge. This is your opportunity. If any of these things that I'm talking about are useful to you, please, I've got all the books and ideas that I mentioned are on my website. You can find me on LinkedIn. Your future work starts today. That is your opportunity to develop the next mindset, skill set, and tool set. Thank you.